sort of enough log pounding area for 6 people, and the rest can be cutting some strips to get ready, and then we'll just swap out. But I was just talking about identifying, and maybe you can remember from summer how to identify it. But it does like a swampy area. It grows very best just outside of a swampy area, so not totally with wet feet, but just kind of up the banks from the swampy area. In terms of what I'm looking for good basket trees, which I'll talk about what that means, just outside of the swampy areas is the best. It's pretty easy to tell from all other trees, but just identifying between like white ash and black ash is the trick. White is also like swampy area. First thing I'm looking at is bark, pretty much. They're similar, but have some differences that are really helpful. And there's 2 here on this black ash, but this one's a terrible example, so it's just this one. But the white ash has these really big like ridges going down with a lot of space, and it's hard. And the black ash is more flaky like this, and it's very corky. Dead white ash bark is also corky and looks very similar to this. The first thing I look for is bark, and then when I think I've got a black ash tree, I mean at this point I know, but the leaves are slightly different, so they're all ash leaves. And actually there's other kinds of ash too. There's blue ash, which doesn't grow around here, and there's green ash, which does, but it's pretty rare. I don't see it very often, and it doesn't get very big, so I don't worry about that one too much. But the leaves are both these compound leaves, so a bunch of leaflets on one stem, and the big difference between them is that the white ash has these little petiole stems attaching to the main stem, and the black ash doesn't have those at all. It just butts right up. And surprisingly, even though branches of both these trees start pretty high up, you can look up in the silhouette of them, you can really actually see that quite well, that there's these spaces. All the branches of ash, that is unique in that it grows in sort of sections, so each year's growth has like a distinctive little lump or like a little nodule there that goes all the way around, so it's sort of these sections of the year's growth. So that's another way to tell ash from any other trees out there. The great thing about ash is that it's a ring porous tree, and it has all this really light, airy spring growth. It's very fast growing in the spring because it's sucking up all the nutrients it needs. And then once it slows down and doesn't need so many nutrient channels, the growth becomes much more dense and the cells closer together, and that's the summer growth. Take these 3-pound mauls and pound over the whole length of the log. You're crushing that spring airy growth, and it releases the summer. So this is a year's growth. You'll see at the end, everybody probably knows the rings of the trees, it's year's growth. These growth rings can be super thin or super thick. And I want a variety, some thin, some thick, because of different applications that I use for basket making. If you look at the end of these logs, and these logs have been sitting in my pond because you have to pound them fresh, like as soon as you cut them, or I can put them in the pond and they'll last forever in the pond. I've had them in there for, I don't know, at least 8 years, and I have heard that people can keep them in water for like decades and pull them out, and you've got a few layers of pond scum colored splints, but you can pound them and still use them. So these have been sitting in my pond, so it makes it a little bit harder to see the growth rings, but when you come over here and we start pounding, it's a good idea to just look at the growth rings, and you can see that on the south side. So then I look for no branches coming out and nice straight pieces. And hopefully I'll get 2 6-foot logs out of a tree. Sometimes I just get 1 before it gets too branchy, and then the rest is just firewood. And so I use 6-foot lengths because that's mostly what I use for pack baskets, these bigger baskets. And then anything of the smaller baskets, like what we're going to make today, there's just extra, we cut pieces in half. Then I haul them back home, and actually now, if I'm cutting somewhere off my land, before I haul them home, I take the bark off. And in the spring, it'll pop right off because of the sap, but I almost never have time to do this in the spring. And so I'm usually doing it other times of year when I have to use a draw knife to take it off, which is just like a knife blade with 2 handles, and I take the bark off that way. Ideally, I would leave the bark on and you would get to see the bark, and it protects it in the pond, but because of this little guy that I don't know if anybody's heard of, but it's the emerald ash borer, and it's come to this area. It's actually, this is in actuality the size of maybe a dime, but it's in Michigan and Minnesota. There's like almost no ash left. This is came over on a boat, you know, from China, and it's just taken over, and the only thing it eats is ash. And it goes in and it eats the cambium, the layer between the wood and the bark, and it eats these little channels in it, which is the nutrient channels for the tree. So eventually the tree dies. Sometimes it takes 8 years or something, but if the trees even are like somewhat dead or dying, they're not great for pounding. They just, the growth rings just adhere together, and it's really difficult. And then in Michigan, like there's a huge basket making community in Michigan, but there's no ash left right now. And so there's all kinds of things that people are trying to do to preserve them, and, you know, make sure that eventually they'll be able to come back. I'm involved with a group in Vermont that's working on that. There's a lot of native communities around. This was originally a skill, you know, taught to us by natives of whatever culture had ash in their midst. They figured this out. I have no idea how, and no one really knows how.
So we're doing basket weaving in a very nice, simple pattern. It's just a lot of rearranging the pattern so that you keep seeing it in the right orientation, and then going the opposite of whatever you've done before. So I guess weaving really is simple. It's just a matter of patience. But it's really cool so far. We're doing the base, and then we're going to add some more that will fill up the basket as it folds. It's going to be pretty cool.
Yes. Yep. And when you do that, if you do it with 2 hands, you can hold it tight. Like you're trying to make that like a tight sort of cross, right up against that. So you use 2 hands, and then this one goes behind.
I'm shaving these pieces so that the inner part of it's really smooth and come out.
This one come clear, and then go like this.
Exactly.
So that the basket can be nice and like smooth,
This one goes
like kind of like these pieces.
Going pretty well if I can just get around this corner. But I think that's kind of life, you know? Let's see. So I'm just kind of like going through a mantra of the directions here, you know? Bottom goes at the top, top goes up and around the corner. Trying to keep it like relatively straight forward. So this is over here.
You got yours
This is trying to just like keep it simple and not not overthink the process, and then just trust that if you do it long enough, you just keep moving forward, you get back to where you started.
I'm ready to finish it.
And this is really cool. And now I have the base of the basket, which is insane.
Wherever it works to tuck it in. So I tuck it into itself.
And wrap that up.